Bonnie, nice to meet you.
Nice to
I'm
meet
trying
you
to
too.
get, we're having a new granddaughter.
Oh, okay.
Bonnie is the name.
Too funny.
How are you?
Good to see you.
There's a vote.
Yeah.
Nice group here. We got some legislators around here.
Yes.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Take
Okay,
care
how
in
are
the
you?
corner.
Okay.
Support Sue.
Well, good job. It's the best job you can get. Okay. Sue, nice to meet you. Thanks for being here. Okay.
I'm Ann.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for joining us. Hi, Stu. Nice to meet you. Stu, good to see you. Good to see you. Who's the brain trust here?
So this is mine, Simone.
Simone, how are you? Hi, Simone.
And Heather,
Yes.
Representative
You got this
Mattson
one?
are the other
MJ,
two.
what's your name? Henry, good to see you. MJ, what's your name? Emma, good to see you.
I love kids.
Yeah, and mine is decked out in stickers.
Yeah.
I
Fantastic.
think mine's stucker.
It's fantastic. She loves them.
Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome. I'm Nicole Brenner-Schmitz. I'm the National Political Director of NARAL Pro-Choice America. We are kicking off these reproductive freedom forums because this, hi, sweetie, this issue is so crucial. And we have seen the change that has happened in the past year in the state legislatures and across this country. We know a few things. We know that 7 in 10 Americans are pro-choice and want to see Roe be protected. We know that the Republicans are purposely putting forward unconstitutional bills and we're going to get them passed because they want them to be worked up to the Supreme Court where they feel they have a better court now. This is a concerted effort and a strategy. It's not a coincidence happening across the country. And we know that they are aware that 7 in 10 Americans are pro-choice, and that's why they're spreading disinformation. They're not talking about it honestly. They're not addressing the issue as it is. Because what this issue is, at its core, is an economic issue. If a woman is not treated as a full citizen and has full autonomy over her own body and those freedoms, she can't make the best decisions about her own education and her own career, which really means that we're not getting the strongest middle class that America can have. And that's the conversation we're having today. So we have some extraordinary NARAL activists here. We have some of the best leaders in the State House, which Iowa really saw and was the front lines. I remember only a couple short months ago when Iowa was the worst of what was happening,
Right.
and
The old days.
and Alabama and Georgia said, "Hold my beer." But it's still quite terrible. And then we have a retired nurse with us, so I just thought I would call on folks and we can have this conversation. We're just so excited to have Governor Enslee be the first forum that we do because so many people, and we appreciate it, in the presidential campaign are talking about this issue and highlighting different plans and how they're pro-choice. But the wonderful thing about the governor is that he talks about it, but he doesn't have to because he shows it. We know from what he signed as governor and what he quite frankly has done since his days even in Congress before becoming governor, stands for all of these, understands what this issue means in this country, and has made Washington State one of the best places, quite frankly, if you need reproductive health care in America. So NARAL appreciates that, and we appreciate you coming here and hearing these stories and talking to these NARAL members. So,
Thank you.
yeah. So with that, I wanted to let Sue go ahead and give her story.
Well, I just want to say that I'm a volunteer because I do really believe that this is an essential issue for women. I think, you know, if women don't have control over their bodies, they don't have control over their lives. They, you know, men can impregnate them and go off and still have a wonderful career, finish their college, you know, but women, there's too many women who don't have the support that they need. They cannot finish college, therefore they cannot get a decent paying job when they're trying to raise this child alone. And the men have no financial responsibilities. I mean, you know, they can try to get support, financial support, but the men just don't follow through. I mean, who pays for their medical care? the man does not take any of that responsibility. Who pays for the child care? Who pays for raising that child? You know, and if the woman doesn't have a decent paying job, how is she supposed to be able to raise a child? I just think it's essential. And the other part about it is you know, they're even stopping in the case of rape. And how awful is that for a woman to have to be pregnant and raise a child? She's faced every day with the thoughts of how, you know, how that child came into being. I mean, it's the turmoil. It's just horrendous. Men don't have to put up with that. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks for your volunteering. I know you're not getting rich. Just emotionally.
Right. Well, yeah, it's good to be with people who feel the same way I do.
Yeah.
You know, the conversation in this country has become to the point where you cannot discuss any, you know, I just don't talk about it with anybody. But when I'm with people that feel the way I do, then you can feel like you can be yourself. So.
Thank you.
Bonnie, do you want to share?
Sure.
And introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, I'm Bonnie. I'm an activist with NARAL, and I really appreciate the work you've done as governor around issues of pro-choice and reproductive freedom in Washington State. So one of the reasons that I volunteer with NARAL is because, well, first of all, in the 1973, when Roe v. Wade was enacted, it was my grandparents' generation that fought for that and fought for our reproductive freedoms, and I don't think that they thought that we would ever have to come back and do this fight again. You know, with state legislators state legislatures across the country and in other states passing legislation that is very harmful to women and trying to take it to the Supreme Court, as you had mentioned earlier. You know, that's very frightening. And I'm raising a son, and I'm kind of going off of Sue's comments here because your comments really struck me and really it resonated with me because I was 19 when I got pregnant, and I was also married, and I was in a situation of domestic violence. So I was in and out of a domestic violence shelter 3 times during that pregnancy. And I chose to have my child, but I can't imagine like if I didn't have the choice, because it was something I thought about. Abortion was something I thought about, even adopting my child out, because I couldn't have imagined having my child and bringing my child into a situation of domestic violence. So when my son was 3 months old, I got out of the situation. I wanted my son to be away from my ex-husband, who was my abuser, because I never wanted him to grow up and think it was okay to abuse women. So I am happy that I'm out of that situation and that I have a good support system. I have my family and I have my friends who came back and helped me once I got out of that situation. But it's been very difficult. You know, now my son's 9, everything's been going well, but raising him from birth till now on my own, not having any support, except, you know, with my family, but not from the biological father. So when you were saying that, that really resonated with me, and I totally understand. So I struggled. I was working a minimum wage job, finally went back to college after a while, you know, just graduated with my master's degree a couple weeks ago. So, but for a woman who gave birth to a child at age 19 and doesn't have that support of the family and was going through maybe a situation of domestic violence like I was, I can't imagine how that would be for her. So I'm very lucky to have that support from my family and friends. Yes.
Thanks for having the courage to tell us your story. Congratulations. Where'd you graduate in?
At Drake University.
And
Yes.
what program?
Public administration.
All right.
Yes.
Well, come on out. You might work in the White House someday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Yes.
It's quite an achievement.
Yeah.
Thank you so
It
much.
really is.
Wow.
Well, thank you both for sharing and for being such super volunteers for NARAL. They make phone calls and volunteer in campaigns and help elect folks, so it's
Yes.
wonderful. So I wanted to invite Representative Mattson to share a little bit about Iowa in particular and what you faced this legislative cycle.
Sure. Well, the last few years in the legislature have been tough, as I'm sure you've heard. And Planned Parenthood, and I know this is obviously a NARAL event, but Planned Parenthood does seem to draw the brunt of the criticism in the state when it comes to what's happening in the legislature. But what we've seen over the last few years are the defunding of Planned Parenthood when it comes to family planning. We've also seen a 6-week abortion ban, which fortunately has been struck down by the Iowa Supreme Court, but also a 20-week abortion ban, a 72-hour waiting period, all over the course of 2 legislative sessions. And then this last session that we just finished was defunding for sex education. And the, I know, right, which is counterproductive and for so many reasons, but also really it is, how do I want to say this? It's obviously frustrating and it's hurtful, you know, in so many ways, because it is telling women that they are not valued in the same way as men. It's telling our kids that we don't necessarily think you need to have the best options when it comes to education, when we know that we have trusted providers that provide really amazing education. When it comes to sex ed, which is not easy to teach. I think if we all remember, sex ed in high school wasn't always enjoyable because we didn't always have the best education, you know, and people that were comfortable teaching it. And so I think it's important that we do have people in this state and organizations in this state that are comfortable teaching sex ed so that our kids can make really smart, healthy decisions that reflect their own personal values. And what I worry about is where the majority party is taking this state when it comes to reproductive health care. They're taking it backwards and they're just making it harder for people to make healthy decisions. And so that's something that I've really focused on in the last session, was speaking out against these things, trying to get get our family planning network back up again, because we have seen major decreases in the number of people who are, women in particular, who are participating in family planning program because the resources just aren't there and the program isn't there. When we saw 4 clinics, you know, close across the state, we're seeing just kind of this domino effect and this spiraling. We have seen the maternal mortality rate double in the last 3 years, yes, in this state. And we've seen labor and delivery wards close in rural hospitals across this state. And I think it's really important that we focus on all of these pieces and show how they are connected, right? That, you know, closing a family planning clinic means a lot more than just, oh, you know, they can go somewhere else. Well, when there isn't a somewhere else, then you're really hurting all of the people who would be going there. Yeah.
Well, some of us think if you believe in driver's ed, you ought to believe in sex ed too.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
They are equally worrisome.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah, so
Keep the
that's-
faith. I'm glad
absolutely.
you're standing strong
Thank you.
and unbowed and perseverant. So thank you for your leadership. I know it takes a lot
Thank
when
you
you're
so
fighting
much.
battles like that.
Thank you. Yes. And I
We-
could go
we'll
on and on, but I'm
we'll-
sure other people
We'll
want
intend to
to
get you some more help in the upcoming elections.
Yes, that is the goal. Yes.
So on the other side of the Iowa hill is Senator Enslee, and was a tremendous leader for us in the Senate. So wanted to have you share a little bit from the perspective of the other side.
The Iowa Senate used to be the place where bad bills went to die, up until about 5 years ago. And now they're the place where bad bills get started and get sent over to the House. So I just want to say, there's a few things that really struck me this year. One was the religious aspect of some of these, the nature of some of these bills were very conservative Republican legislators who imposed their own personal religious beliefs, not only in the legislation, but, you know, forced us to listen to it in committee hearings and on the House or on the Senate floor. So there's that. And then Also entering the debate was conflating some of the other things that are happening across the country, like this new false narrative of infanticide, which is, you know, extremely disturbing, that's going rampantly unchecked on conservative media 24/7. So that even entered the dialogue a little bit in the Iowa Senate, so that's extremely disturbing. Also is the lack of facts and the lack of comprehension of facts and how much elections matter. For example, a combination of the ACA and long-term birth control programs all over the country, as you know, combined to create the lowest abortion rate in our country's recent history. And just the fact that there, you know, the other side is not acknowledging that birth control and sex ed and, you know, having health insurance are the three things that really prevent abortions. And I think we can all agree that that's a good thing. You know, we don't want more abortions. We want to be able to prevent abortions, but in the right way. By trusting women, trusting education, trusting long-acting birth control especially. So, yeah, it was just like bizarro land. In the Senate, watching my colleagues just rant, having a Bible on the table while they're talking about their own personal beliefs and having, you know, just lack of facts anywhere. Then, you know, Governor, the one thing I want to just reiterate is it's so important for men to talk about this, and it's not a wedge issue. This is a mainstream issue, not a sideshow. It's a mainstream issue that we all need to talk about. Then, one other thing I want to mention is not only did we try to, you know, roll back all these abortion laws, but then they would also stand up and, in the same breath, try to take away health care, try to take away food stamps, try to take away supports for women and children and families like workers' comp and, you know, just basic stuff like when you lose your job and you get, let's say it's, you know, 50 weeks of benefits. Iowa has a really great unemployment insurance program that's extremely well funded. They tried to roll that back too. So, you know, not only, and then education too. So once a child is born, how do we take care of that child? So the two things were happening at once. It was such cognitive dissonance. I wish you could have been there. It was just, I only cried 3 times this year. And some of those days were just out of frustration. You know, just like, wow, I can't believe we're having this conversation, and then I can't believe no facts are entering into this conversation. So that was my experience as a legislator, and I know a lot of the activists in the galleries were just with their mouths hanging open, just like, what is happening? So we need to put a stop to it. I think the federal government plays a huge role in that. And, you know, I would want a president that would stand up and speak for women and families, just not as a wedge issue, but as a mainstream issue.
I'm volunteering for that position. And by the way, I want to thank you for your leadership and Fred Hubbell's leadership too. I know his leadership of Planned Parenthood has been dramatic. We did everything we could. Thank you for helping him. We'll be back. So thanks for your leadership. I know it's tough when the factual part of this is so difficult when people just want to ignore facts in so many varieties on this issue, on climate change. It's nice to have a common set of facts to work from.
Absolutely.
But we got to keep pushing it.
Right.
So thank you for being vocal.
Yeah.
So I would like to invite Anne to share a few words. Anne is a retired nurse. She was a nurse for over 40 years, and she grew up in Iowa and was a nurse most recently here, but has been a nurse in half a dozen states, including living in Washington State at one point in her life. So Anne would like to share a couple stories as from a medical professional.
You should come back, Ann, because we just passed a bill to have mandatory breaks for nurses.
Really? Wow.
Come on back.
I lived in Vancouver.
Oh, really?
And I had an aunt who lived in Tacoma, and I just loved Washington State, and I shouldn't have left it.
No, you're a good place.
I thank you for having me talk. My name is Ann Byrne, and I've been a nurse for 42 years. I retired a year ago. I'm not a labor and delivery nurse, nor am I a postpartum nurse. Those are the nurses that really have some horror stories about this. And it seems to me, this is a real professional and personal concern of mine, what's going on with women reproductive rights. It seems to me that all they talk about is abortion. And there's a much broader umbrella. There's education, there's diseases that they want to talk about, birth control, and choices for women and for men. It isn't just for women. I think they're kind of out of the conversation too, like has been mentioned here. I've worked in several venues. I've worked in nursing homes and hospitals, mainly hospitals. But in the nursing homes that I have worked in, elderly women, any number of them, it was always a surprise to me. They'd come up to me and they would say, honey, I had an abortion. I had to. We had no money. We had no way of feeding the child. And this was before Roe versus Wade, so of course they did not go to a physician for it. They did not, it was under the table, so to speak. And one woman said to me, when you made that decision, you literally took your life in your hands, and I believed her. I'm like, yes. The other story that I have, which is a real horror story, I'm just looking at my notes here, was in the hospital, and we had a 16-year-old girl who came up to us, and she was comatose. She never regained consciousness. She died. Her parents took her emergently to the ER with severe abdominal cramping. And of course the doctor there immediately said she's having a baby. She didn't know that. Neither did her parents. No one knew that she was pregnant. And when she died on our floor. She did not die in the ER. But she had been preeclamptic. She'd never had physician care prior to her delivery. Her blood pressure was too high and we could not get it under control. If you want to talk about a devastated, heartbroken family, they were just in shock. It's such as the fear of young people of ridicule and rejection, of being, pregnant without benefit of marriage or even maybe knowledge of it. They had in the Des Moines Register yesterday, I don't know if anybody saw the Des Moines Register on the opinion page, they had a doctor, very good articles, talk about some of the experiences he had before Roe versus Wade. I don't know if anyone saw it, but it's really good article of the women and the young girls that died under his care that he could not save because of their abortions. And also another about an incest 11-year-old mentally slow girl who was raped by her grandfather. So I know Alabama and Georgia now have beat Iowa for severity of laws. And in Georgia, I guess it's understood now that if you go across state lines to a more supportive state of women's rights, you come back to Georgia, you're going to be prosecuted for murder. Also, they have pills on the internet, which I think they've probably had for a long time, but people now are afraid to do that because you can be prosecuted for taking those pills. So my question is to legislators, Democrat and Republican alike, what's next for women? Do you deny birth control? Do you deny them wearing diaphragms and condoms for men? Is there not going to be any education for women and their daughters? Never-ending poverty and early death. We can't go back from Roe versus Wade. When I was in college when Roe versus Wade came into law, and everybody was so happy about it and relieved, and criminalizing abortion or birth control of any sort is not the answer. thank you very much for listening to me rant and rave.
Well, thank you, Anne, for sharing that. It's a very unique perspective, and we appreciate everyone at the table sharing. I also wanted to acknowledge our amazing organizer on the ground here, Chelsea, who works so hard, not only with our activists and volunteers, but making sure that we're always raising awareness and the voices are being heard of these stories, because they are everywhere. And as Anne kind of acknowledged, what we haven't changed necessarily is people's embarrassment or fear of talking about it in public. And I think hitting on the senator's point that this is a mainstream issue. This is something that every family has to deal with in some way, from the sex education all the way to abortions, and that it's something we as a society need to be realizing is we're all facing and we're all talking about it, and we need to be able to do that in public, and it will make sure that girls like the one Anne talked about from her story in the hospital can feel comfortable seeking the care that they need to have, so we can prevent tragedies like that. So I know when I began, I talked a little about the governor and what an amazing leader he's been throughout his career, but in particular as governor of Washington State. So I wanted to give you a chance a little bit to talk about what you've done as governor, the bills that you signed that I know both our NARAL affiliate in Washington State, but NARAL Pro-Choice America was so appreciative of and brings to other states as here's what you can be doing. Here's, once we flip some chambers, but here's what you can be doing. Here's the proactive sort of legislation we'd like you to take a look at introducing and passing, but I want you to talk about that if you can, and your vision as president of the United States.
Thank you. She's seconding the motion here. By the way, I just love the fact that we have these children here today. We're doing things to integrate children into our work lives as a women's empowerment issue in part. So we've got the best paid family leave in America, and we've been very successful with children in the workplace recently in our state employment. It's been great. People's productivity has gone up when we have these little darlings sometimes in the office. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And thank you for your statement. Thank you. If anybody ends up in the hospital in my family, I'm going to call for you to come help them. So thanks for your willingness to tell your story. My wife would love to have been here. She was on the Planned Parenthood board and the NARAL board in Washington State, and she wants to thank you for your leadership. She knows it takes courage to stand up, and it's the right thing to do. It's a very American thing to do. I want to tell you how I think of this. We sing and we celebrate. We say we're the land of the free and the home of the brave. And if we're going to be the land of the free, we have to people who are brave, and this community is brave. These legislators are brave, because we're standing up what I believe is a fundamental American value, and that's freedom. This is a freedom issue. It is a freedom from government intrusion in your most personal part of your life that you possibly can have. It is a freedom from having old men tell women what to do with their lives. And that's one of the most basic freedoms that people ought to have in the United States. So I've always looked at this as a freedom from governmental domination in personal lives. And that's how I look at this issue. And I've looked at this issue that same way for a long time. I ran for the legislature in 1988, and it was about a 63-64% Republican district. It was a small agricultural town in eastern Washington. And when we first ran, we thought about this issue, about how to talk about it. And Trudy and I decided to talk about it right up front. So one of the very first TV commercials I ran, I was sitting in a red chair she just bought me, and I spoke to the people about this issue being a freedom issue. And I was elected in a huge upset, and I've always hewed to this position ever since. Because when you invoke a value of freedom, this is a very American thing to do. And I really appreciate the Senator's comment that men need to be engaged in this effort. Because this is not just a women's issue, it is a human rights issue. It affects everyone. Anytime there is a human rights violation anywhere, it's something everybody ought to care about very, very deeply. And this is a human rights issue. So I've been very active in this throughout my public career, and fortunately to good success in our state. We've had some of the best support for Planned Parenthood. We have one of, if not the best, Reproductive Parity Act, because not only do we protect choice statutorily, which we do, independent of what the Supreme Court does, and I'll come back to that in a minute, because we're capable of protecting this freedom interest even without the Supreme Court. We can do it ourselves, basically, through statute. But we want to make sure women get access in the real world, and we know we're losing access in the real world. So that means insurance coverage. So we have one of the best Reproductive Parity Act bills, so that you can make sure you get coverage through insurance. We need to make that a national law. There's just no question about that. We've had success extending LARC, both coverage and real access. So Trudy was very active working with the upstream community to get long-acting contraceptives, training people to make sure they're really available in the real world where people really live. And that's been a very, very important thing. It's very disturbing to me to hear about an increase in maternal mortality. This should not be happening in the United States, in an industrialized nation. And it is doubly disturbing that we have disparate rates based on race. Black women are experiencing maternal mortality at a significantly higher rate than they should. And we've got to get on top of that. And I do believe we have to embrace things that will have specialized response to this. And it's really interesting because some of the research I've seen suggests that it's not demographics, it's throughout the economic spectrum for black women, which would suggest it's based on sort of levels of anxiety from the hangover of our racially disparate communities. So we have a lot of work to do in that regard. So I'm running for president. I can tell you this has been a conviction since day one, since I ran for office in 1988. And I know that we have a battle on our hands. We got a president who, from day one, from the first time we met him, we understood that he has a very degraded view of women in general, in his personal life, in his public life. Most recently, these comments about Meghan Markle, you know, what do you call her, harsh, I think?
Nasty.
Nasty. Called her nasty. I'll tell you what's nasty. It's nasty to have a person like Donald Trump, with his view of women as a belittled part of our community, taking away a woman's right of choice. That's nasty. It's nasty to deny sex ed to young kids, which is the strongest way to prevent abortion. This is clearly the story. If you want to prevent abortion, sex ed is the most powerful tool. It's like saying if you're against abortion, it's like saying, well, you're against explosions, but you won't tell kids about dynamite being dangerous. And that is just maddening. And I'll mention another thing, and I'd like to respect folks frequently, but it's difficult in this regard because I remember talking to our OBGYN, and he said, you know the first people it is who bring their daughters in when they're pregnant? The conservative Republican legislators. They're the first people that come in who campaign on this issue and then understand the significance in their private lives. There's a lot of hypocrisy in this world around this subject. So I want to thank you for your leadership. I can tell you we need a federal law that will guarantee this civil right. And this is a civil right. We guaranteed civil rights in the 60s when we guaranteed voting and access. And if we're going to guarantee a civil right to be able to go to a hotel, regardless of your race, you got to have a civil right in this country to have your individual decision-making as a woman. So I would propose that, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about how to structure that. But I believe that we ought to need that. Yes?
I have one more question and comment. I forgot to mention that there is one thing that the Republicans are really good at, and that is stacking not only the courts in their favor, but also they're on a 30, 40-year-long project to basically get people into office at the local level, state level, and then now the federal level, and they've been extremely successful in that regard. What is your view on how to get not only more women, but just more Democrats into office at these local levels? And then also, what are your views on packing the courts and all that?
Well, winning the White House is the first thing I would intend to do, and maybe one of the most important. But I want to thank your organization and Nicole for your grassroots efforts, being here today, empowering things. Somebody said, was it Ann or Bonnie, about the need to be together and people build a community. This is a way to build a community. I mean, we ought to talk to Bonnie about running for the school board here next year. Or the
Exactly.
city council.
Yes.
And we gotta get Ann involved in pounding on doors for Bonnie when she runs. And I guess what I would say is that you are so right. This is a long-term effort. As Nicole said, this is a long-term, conspiracy might be too heavy a word, but it is a long-term, national, well-funded effort that is now reaching its peak. So what I would say is we should try to empower people to understand the importance of local offices and the importance of state legislative offices and city council races. And I will come help you do that because I really believe in it. I ran for the state legislature in 1988. I'd never thought about politics before, but my wife and I got involved in a school bond. We passed our school bond on the 7th try. It failed 6 times. We finally passed it, and the chowder heads in the legislature cut the funding formula in half. So I got mad about it, ran for office, and here I am today. So that's the kind of story we want to see replicated. And I will help you. If you got a candidate, you want me to call him and urge him to vote, I'll do it.
So, can I add something? Because I want to touch on something you said, and then you just talked about a conspiracy. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if you haven't had a chance to read Nancy McLean's Democracy in Chains, it gives you a history of this whole thing, starting back during the Civil War, of a process of, and then Brown versus the school board decision in Virginia, that whole process, and it outlines a school of thought out of Chicago and a number of other people that will give you a background to what is happening and everything that she's a historian. And have you not seen
I have
that?
not seen this, no.
That is it's
Yeah.
just an interesting read. It's almost like a scary novel.
Yeah.
Because everything that she talks about or writes about in that book is what's happening with the things that you were mentioning regarding how everything is a 30, 40, 50 year, 100-year plan. And it is true. So I don't know if that makes it a conspiracy or not, but it is true.
Conspiracy is probably the wrong word because it's
No.
open and we're aware of it. If it's conspiracy, it's a failed one because we publicly are aware of it.
Wow.
But what you said, what Nicole said is really important, is that very unfortunately, the Republican Party has been captured by a minority of people in America because a majority of Americans support a woman's right of choice.
Right.
A majority of Americans believe a woman ought to be free to make her own destiny decision. And what has happened is this party has been captured by a small group of folks. It's true on this issue of a woman's right of choice. It's true on the issue of gun safety, where a majority of Americans want common sense gun safety legislation. But this is an organization or party that's been captured by this small group. So it's our job to, at the ballot box, to restore the majority view, and I believe that's the case here. Talk to me a little bit about, I've said that we need a federal civil rights law on this, statutorily, so we don't have to depend on the Supreme Court. I'd like to know your thoughts about that. By the way, I want to comment on your Supreme Court. We know we're not going to allow this again. Anybody going on the Supreme Court is going to recognize the right of choice, and that's a fundamental right. And there's nothing wrong when you appoint a justice to make sure that he or she understands that this is a freedom issue. And you should have no qualms of doing that. I would not.
One of the things I would ask you to do specifically is, Republicans have been really good about rallying their base around, the Supreme Court. I think Democrats need that same warning message. Listen, folks, there's no wiggle room left.
Right, right.
The next justice is going to
Right.
be so crucial, so
Right.
that needs to be said out loud over and over so that people get it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you have, would you like to hear a very forceful voice on this, call Trudy. She will help. She will let people know how important it is.
And I do like the idea of a federal law, kind of sealing the deal on it, but that's only as good, the next Congress can come in and flip it.
Yeah,
You know.
no.
But I think, part of the other thing we need to do is also look at gerrymandering too. Because all the
Yes.
states that are passing all of these crazy laws and stuff even in Wisconsin, which is kind of Democratic, but
Right.
you wouldn't notice by the legislature doing it.
Right.
So I think that we need to level the playing field, you know, and we're lucky in Iowa that we have a really good, you know, non-biased, you know, system to do it, but I'm afraid that's probably
That might be
gonna,
next.
that's
Well,
gonna
let
be
me,
next.
let me touch on it.
They're
I think
gonna
there's a
make-
lot of reforms we need.
Yeah.
Gerrymandering is an obvious one. That's why I'm happy we flipped 7 seats. We won 7 Democratic seats as governors because they can help stop gerrymandering. I was Democratic Governors Association chair when we did that.
Yeah, we almost got it here.
We need a voting rights law. I believe voting is a civil right, and we need to make national what we've done in our state, which is to assure people can vote by mail, so that the local, you know, registrar in Alabama can't put all the voting machines in the white neighborhoods and fewer in the black neighborhoods, and pay postage, because kids don't have stamps, right?
Yeah.
No one under the age of 35 has a stamp around the house. So we paid postage this year, and that ought to be a
Yeah.
federal civil right, in my view. I think we should eliminate the electoral college. I think it's time for,
Amen.
in my
Yeah.
view, for democracy in this country.
Yeah.
And here's a very important one. I believe, and I know this is not universal, but I believe we should eliminate the filibuster, because we will not be able to pass a civil rights law for choice, or a climate change bill,
Yeah.
or an extension for universal health care, or any significant measure when Mitch McConnell has the filibuster.
Yes.
And we are the party of positive progressive change, and I think we ought to be willing to accept democracy in this regard.
Yeah,
So I was the first candidate to say that, and I feel real strongly about it.
cool. Yeah, and I also think like the whole, because I know we've kind of seen like the relief bill here for the flooding, you know,
Uh-huh.
out west.
Yep.
It gets stopped like a couple of times by someone just raising,
Yep.
you know, point of privilege about
Yeah.
it. You know, that it's done, they can't pass it, and I think that's just.
Well, and we'd like to
It's
stop,
sad.
we'd like to stop the cause of increased flooding, which is
Yes.
climate change. And to do that, we can't allow Mitch McConnell to block every single climate change bill with the
Yeah.
filibuster. I went to
He needs to
Hamburg,
retire.
I went to Hamburg, and I went to Davenport. I went to Davenport, met a really interesting woman, is it Regina Haddock? I think it was Regina, who had a nonprofit that helps women, a lot of victims of domestic violence, get back on their feet, and she serves 1,500 women. It's called Dress for Success in Davenport. It's been really successful, and the flood essentially destroyed that nonprofit, and just, it's so sad. She's been so successful, and she doesn't have a vision statement right now, anyway, I don't think. And so I went to Hamburg, that was founded in 1858. It had never been flooded since 1858. Now it's under 8 feet of water. We need to
Wow.
stop the cause of this flooding, in my book.
Right.
Yes.
Well, we just lost in this state the right, the oil oligarchs have the right to take your land
Mm.
for their own profit. The
Mhm.
Supreme Court just ruled here that.
Really? I didn't hear
Yes.
this.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, am I not right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eminent domain.
I may be
domain.
saying
Eminent
it, well,
domain, but it-
I call it stealing, but you can, I mean,
Right.
they did. I mean, it was taken,
But it's
a farmer's land for the oil, for oligarchs, not for public use.
Well, the oil industry is taking farmers' land today because it's flooding the farmers' land. I mean, it's causing climate change, which is dramatically increasing these flooding events. So you can think of it as the industry taking farmers' land even without eminent domain. They're just taking it by causing climate change.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is off topic a little bit, but
It all
I've been very
begins.
committed to solving this problem, and I've got what's been called the best plan by a lot of different people, including Greenpeace, on how to defeat climate change. If any of you are interested, you check it out.
But this is all part of the democracy.
It is. We'd like to have freedom not to be flooded.
And
There's
make
another
choice-
freedom.
Make choices.
Yeah, I've been sort of a tour of the apocalypse. I was in Paradise, California, this town of 25,000 that burned down. Seminole Springs, met this woman. She took me up, she said, I want to show you my home. I want to show you my net worth. So we took a walk up. She was at the end of this road in Seminole Springs. It's a little mobile home community up in the foothills north of LA. And I got there, and there's just a little pile of molten aluminum. She had a mobile home. And I want to show you my net worth. It's my driveway, because my driveway didn't burn. But she was really proud of it, because she had designed the driveway. She built the driveway out of rock. She put these really cool designs in it. And when you see a person crying like that, it's so devastating, because she didn't have adequate insurance, obviously. These mobile homes very rarely have adequate insurance. I've just seen a lot of people in tears over this. So I'm dedicated to do something about this. How else could I help? Get some of your colleagues elected, right?
Yes.
Get involved. I'm sure Senator Celsey would say get involved with the Senate Majority Fund.
There you go.
As a House Democrat, I'll say get involved with the House Truman Fund.
Good.
So,
And we
Well,
can use some door knockers, so.
There you go. Well, I'll be
Yes.
knocking on
Kind
doors,
of
so I
get
can make sure to
involved
bring
on,
this up. I'll be
so,
thinking of
yeah.
your efforts.
Some nice good swing districts out in the suburbs, so
Yeah.
it'll be good.
We'll be active.
and I would say certainly, winning the Iowa House is a critical component of how we move forward in this state. We've got 4 seats that we obviously need to hold what we have, but win 4 more seats to get into the majority, to be able to stop, the bad things that have been
Yeah.
happening, because obviously we don't have a governor's race for another 2 years after this one. And we still have a lot of work to do in the Senate to get to the place where we need to go, given that not everyone is up at the same time. But
Yeah.
we have real opportunities in the House to
Yeah.
win in 2020, and so anything that you and your team can do to help that.
I'll look
would be
for
great.
one way
Yeah.
I can help is to make sure that I'm vocal on this issue, as I was
Please,
back in
yes.
1988. I'm just not
Absolutely.
shy about this. I do
Yeah.
believe this is a fundamental freedom character issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to campaign, and I've done it on many different occasions. One other thing we should talk about too, which is access to health care in general.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've had a really good success with Obamacare, and we've got 800,000 people now. It's been very successful. We now have adopted the first public option in the United States. So this, 2 weeks ago, I signed a public option bill to try to have a state-sanctioned plan, which we think is really important for access, and also to reduce costs, because costs are one of the biggest problems here, it's not just access.
Yeah.
We've also just passed the first long-term elder care bills in the United States. So we provided a fund that will, for the first time in the country, provide some stability for elders. And we know that with we baby boomers and the Woodstock generation getting to our years and the dementia crisis that we're facing, that we think this is really important. So I think it can serve as a template. Both these bills, the public option and the long-term care, I think can be a template for the rest of the country, I think.
And I think you're certainly on the right track talking about healthcare, and I want to just kind of echo one of the things that Senator Celsey said as well, of just that we do need to work with a common set of facts, right?
Yes.
And healthcare, we have statistics. We know exactly what's happening. Maternal mortality rate is, and the closure of labor and delivery wards is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Reproductive health care in Iowa is really difficult to come by. And sometimes it doesn't seem like that when you live in the Des Moines metro like we all do, right? Like I could go to any number of providers. That is not the case in most parts of the state. And Iowa is 50th in the nation when it comes to the number of OB-GYNs per capita.
Really?
Yes.
No kidding.
And it is not getting better.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah.
and that's what I meant before when I was talking a little bit about that domino effect. Like we're seeing, you can't, defund on family planning and then not expect something to happen.
Right.
We've also seen a dramatic increase in STDs, particularly on gonorrhea and syphilis. And there was a recent report that came out of our Iowa Department of Public Health on these numbers. And it's just a matter, of drawing the line, right? When these policies are enacted, there is an inevitable conclusion, right? So to be able to tie all of it together and do it under the conversation of healthcare as a whole, I think that's what will resonate with people, because healthcare, no matter what kind it is,
Right.
is intensely personal.
Right.
Right. And so, as you said, with freedom from government interference, that's a big part of it. We would never tell someone who has received a cancer diagnosis what they can and cannot do about that. Right. We would say, trust your doctor, work with your doctor,
Right.
on making those choices. But for whatever reason, which I'm sure many of us could come up with the very obvious reasons of why this is, but women in particular are told, what they can and cannot do, what providers are trusted, you know, and which aren't when it comes to their own reproductive health care, which is just as important
Yeah.
as any other kind of health
Yeah.
care. So I think if we're talking about it in the bigger context, that also helps bring more people into the conversation because it all ties together.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's a super important point. That's one of the reasons we've been so intent on actually getting practical access. That's why we did this training. I mentioned my wife Trudy worked with Upstream to make sure people had training about LARCs. Because a lot of people have
Yes.
not had that. So on-the-ground access is really, really important. I'm sorry to say that you've had this experience with STDs and like. It's very
Yes.
disturbing. By the way, this is one thing about being disturbed and being angry. We are appropriately raising our voices on this, and I think that's important too. This is not, we should not go gently into that good night, so to speak. And so we had to recognize that this is a precious right being taken away. And when that happens, voices need to be raised, men and women, and I'm committed to that. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, wow.
What else are you going to do to help the good of the order here?
I think we could use a new senator.
Yeah.
I know that, yeah, Joni's up, you know, and now with her new spanking new position on the Judiciary Committee, it kind of scares me that she's there, you know, and I don't think she's taking that role seriously enough. You know, I know she hasn't read the Mueller report and stuff, but I think some new help, you know, because I know Cindy and Abby could use a new friend on the other side of the
Well, we were
aisle.
very pleased with their leadership.
Yeah.
Their arrival has been fantastic.
I'm super, super proud of Cindy. I just couldn't
Yeah.
say enough
Yeah.
things about her.
They've had a really good start.
Yeah.
Now, I have not yet met, did I understand Dave, did Dave endorse a successor
Yes.
to Ropesack?
Rita Hurd.
Rita Hart.
Rita.
Yeah.
So I have not met her yet.
Oh, she's
Great.
phenomenal.
So
Yeah.
we're going to be very interested in Rita's success.
Yeah. I'm very excited for Rita, so that'll be.
I'm sorry Dave is
yeah.
leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love serving with Dave. It was great. Well, you guys, I want to thank you. I know if I can extend a lifeline from the state of Washington we're still pulling on the same rope in the same direction. And I want to thank you. I've always thought I started my career as a Democrat in a very Republican area. And I always thought the Democrats who were in Republican areas were like the best because they were strongest and toughest, right? So the work you're doing in this community in Iowa right now, you're in the front lines right there. So we're in the back lines trying to support you. So when you need some rations or munitions, give us a call.
You got it.
Because we'd like to help you out. Let's go build a new free day for the women of America. Thanks very much. It's been a joy to meet you.
Thank you for
Don't forget to vote.
listening.
Yeah.
Worry about that.
Thank you, these little ones. Can we give the little ones a round of applause? Great.
In here, Pete.
Can we do
Yeah.
a photo of the
Yeah, let's
wall
do
with
it.
everybody?
Let's do it. Forgot my purple tie, but anyway.
Oh, Simone.
And Donnie's over there in England reading.